changing fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions. And what do we do with decimals and fractions that are greater than 1? Taking a look at this hundredths grid, I will see that there are 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64 hundredths colored in. If I'm going to put that in a place value chart, it's going to look like 64 hundredths. I have 6 tenths, 6 full rows, and 4 hundredths. If I want to write that as a decimal notation, I'm going to write it as decimal 64 hundredths. If I write it as a fraction, I'm going to write it as 64 hundredths. If I take a look at this example, I have 1, 2, 3. I have 3 hundredths. I have 0 tenths because I have no full rows colored in. To write 3 hundredths as a decimal, I write it as decimal 0.03 because I have no tenths and I know that hundredths is in the second place value. As a fraction, I have 3 hundredths. Does it matter if my shaded in squares are moved all over the place? No. 10, 20, 30, 31, 32. I have 32 hundredths shaded in. I have 3 complete rows and 2 hundredths. As a decimal, I have decimal 32. As a fraction, I have 32 hundredths. But I do need to remember, hundredths are shown with 2 decimal places. 9 hundredths is written as decimal 0.9. 9 tenths is written as decimal 9. If I'm given the decimal notation and I'm asked to write it as a fraction, this says 6 tenths. As a fraction, I have 6 tenths. This says I have 63 hundredths. So I have 63 hundredths. If I given the fraction and I need to write it as a decimal, this says I have 3 hundredths. As a decimal, I have 3 hundredths. I have no tenths. If I colored it in, I have no full rows. I would just have 3 hundredths. I have 24 hundredths. As a decimal, I have 8 tenths. As a decimal, it will become decimal 8. If I was to color that in on a hundredths grid, I would have 8 full rows. I have 80 hundredths. Decimal 8, 0. But it could also be decimal 8 because if I colored in 80 hundredths on the hundredths grid, I would have 8 full rows. 8 tenths is equivalent to 80 hundredths. They are equal in value. If I have a number larger than 1, if I'm using my base 10 blocks and I have a number larger than 1, I have 2 wholes, 4 tenths, and 3 hundredths. As a decimal, it's written as decimal 43, 2 and 43 hundredths. As a fraction, this picture represents 2 and 43 hundredths. If I take a look at my hundredths grids, I have 1 whole, and I have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64. I have 1 and 64 hundredths. If I were to write that as a decimal, I have 1 and 64 hundredths. The decimal says end. If I'm given the mixed fraction and asked to write it as a decimal, I have 3 and 18 hundredths. I have 3 and 18 hundredths. I have 12 and 3 tenths. 1 place value for tenths, 2 place values for hundredths. 25 and 4 hundredths. Hundredths. I need 2 place values. 25 and 4 tenths. 25 and 4 tenths. I have tenths. It's in the first place value. Similar, yet very different.